All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to Talking Buffalo podcast, part of the Blue Wire Network. I am your host, Patrick Moran. Thank you very much for locking in today, whether it's on the audio side, Spotify, Apple, or now we are on YouTube, Talking Buffalo podcast on YouTube. I'm joined by my man, Greg Tompsett from Cover One. And let me tell you something, man. You are the only dude that I know that's got the clout to put an episode taping on hold because the NBA Cleveland Cavaliers are playing in overtime on a Monday night.
I thought it was going to be over nice and easy, and then they let it go to overtime, but they won, so it's okay. And I'm actually taking my kids this Friday night. We're going to a game. Actually, I'm going to both Friday and Saturday night games, so I'm pumped. That's my my second favorite love behind the Buffalo Bills.
They're good now.
It's fun. It's a really fun team. It's a really fun team.
Garland's a nice player. They got a nice roster.
Garland, Mobley, Jared Allen. It's fun.
The All-Star game was in Cleveland recently.
Oh,
right?
yeah. No, my wife and I and my daughter got to go to the All-Star game in a suite. It was awesome. Got to see the top 75 players ever introduced. One of the coolest nights I've gotten to see. Getting to see like Michael Jordan in person, Magic Johnson, everybody. It was amazing.
Yeah, that is awesome. I'll tell you what, man. We obviously got a lot of football to talk about. For that, though, I do want to ask you a question because you've had some fun during at least some Sabre games from time to time on Twitter with your Greg Doesn't Know Hockey hashtag on Twitter. Maybe that's the case. Maybe it's not. But I do want to ask you at least a semi-serious question here. The Buffalo Sabres, I know you're following them to at least some extent anyway, as much as you can. This team is actually starting to play really good hockey, and they're fun to watch. I mean, this was a big week for them. On Thursday night, they beat Jack Eichel in Vegas. I mean, almost like a storybook kind of way where Peyton Krebs scores, and then Tuck takes the puck from Eichel on a turnover for the empty netter. And then on Sunday in Hamilton, they go on, they beat Toronto in the Heritage Classic. I mean, for a hockey guy, or somebody who's aspiring to be a hockey guy like yourself anyway, I mean, right now, like, what's your level of fun when you do get an opportunity? I'm sure you don't get to watch them as much as you want, but from time to time you do, or you at least follow along on Twitter and stuff like that. Is it starting to become a little more fun for you to follow hockey like this?
For sure. Obviously, it's a lot more enjoyable when the people that I'm, watching with or following along online are having a better time. And I, obviously, it started as a very serious thing. Like, I genuinely had no clue what was going on other than the fact that I'm, a reasonably intelligent person who can watch a sport and kind of figure out what's happening. But I didn't understand any of the rules. I didn't understand any of the nuance or strategy of why things were happening or where stuff was going. I vaguely understood what offsides was, but I didn't understand about passing beyond certain amounts of lines and things. Right. So I actually, reached out to some guys, to Chad and Anthony and guys that I asked, hey, what can I do to learn? They got me some books, which I've read through and understood. Now I watch and I understand what's going on. And obviously I know enough that I think this season would have been a little bit different if the goaltending worked out a little bit differently. Like maybe it'd be different. Sure. I don't know that they'd be in the running for the playoffs or anything like that, but it'd be a lot different than where they are in the standings. And I think you're seeing it now that as you're bringing up some of these young guys, all the fun and excitement in Rochester now coming to Buffalo, seeing the fruition of some of the trades. It's at least, in my opinion, it looks like it's going to end the season to where the financial position they're in, the draft position they're going to be in, and with the young talent, there's legitimate reason for excitement for next season, and that's cool.
It is. The young guys are playing well. They got young guys in the pipeline almost ready to come up. They got 3 first-round draft picks next year, and they're playing a pretty fun brand of hockey. And to your point, which is, you may not be the biggest hockey guy in the world, but you do bring up a really good point. The goaltending this year is the reason what's kept the Sabres. I agree with you. Not necessarily playoff contention, but, probably 4 or 5 games at least they'd be better if Craig Anderson didn't get hurt and miss as much time as he did. All right, so we're going to dive into football, and let me preface this for everybody listening right now. Let me set the table, I should say. This is dropping on Tuesday morning. Hopefully you're hearing it somewhere around then. We are taping this around 10 p.m. on Monday night. And while we're talking, with everything going on in the NFL, Greg and I both got the corner of our eye, at least, on our tweet text for potential breaking news. We did talk about this. We joked about this a little bit on Twitter on Monday, but I mean, it's real. 2 years ago when I had Greg on, right as free agency was started on that first night. It was right around, well, maybe not quite this late, but it was pretty late at night. And literally in the middle of the episode, the Bills ended up trading for Stephon Diggs. And I'll never forget that for no other reason than, these shows for the most part, I think, Greg, and you do, you do a ton of shows, whether it's with you and Aaron on Cover One or you guest on a lot of them, that these shows for the most part are somewhat structured. Like you have you have a bunch of notes and you kind of have a game plan, so to speak, on how you're going to attack that episode. When something like that comes out of left field in the middle and you're kind of like, you're acting literally on the fly. It was fun, but also kind of difficult to react.
Stressful.
It was because, we try, Greg, I know you do, and so do I. We try to be objective and kind of sort of a little bit take the fandom out while we're speaking, at least on the shows. But how do you not, fanboy out immediately when something like that goes down? It was just so big.
And if people don't remember the order that things happened last year, in that year you're talking about a combination of, I think the biggest signing at that point had been AJ Klein. I think was that was the biggest ad at that point. So everybody was kind of disappointed. We'll talk about it. I think there's a lot more excitement today on the first day free agency than what there was at that point. But at that point, it was kind of, us reassuring people that, hey, more stuff's going to come. I know it wasn't a really exciting day. And then we're sitting there live like, and I remember seeing it and having to like triple check to make sure I wasn't getting tricked by some account
fake
like
ones.
Pat, I'm pretty sure we just traded for Stephon Diggs. It was awesome. I've listened back to that clip a couple times. It's so funny to hear our live reaction.
It is fun. It is, and it's and you make a good point too on Twitter, especially. You got to watch for those fake accounts. A fake Adam Schefter struck today on a Allen Robinson signing. I think it might have been with Jacksonville, where a couple Buffalo media people fell for it. Anyway, shit happens. But so far today, as we're taping this right now, the Bills have added 3 veterans. I'm kind of just going to go through a lot of stuff and get your opinions and your thoughts on it. That's kind of why I wanted to get you on for this episode. Let's start with we'll start with the offensive guard. Roger Saffold comes from Tennessee, made the Pro Bowl last year. It's a 2-year deal technically, but he even tweeted out, I think he said essentially it's a 1-year deal.
It's a void year to decrease the cap hit.
Right. He's in. Darrell Williams is out. Let me start here too, because the general assumption was if Darrell Williams would either take a pay cut or he would be released. Based on this signing and Aaron Kromer and just the style, the way this offensive line is going to be, do you think that this was just as much, if maybe not even more, about on the field football fit, adding him instead of Darrell Williams, as it was Darrell Williams' cap hit is over $9 million this year. We just can't afford it. How much do you think this was a football move as well as obviously some form of financial move as well?
I'm going to say 90% plus football, because I honestly expect Saffold to make about the same amount of money or more than what Williams was making. Now with the void year, I'm sure the cap hit will be smaller. But you're talking about a superior player. Like he's simply better than what Williams is. And now you're going back, he played some of his best football under Aaron Kromer. He's also, and I want to give a credit to Joe Buscaglia, went through and identified a trend with the offensive line, the like relative athletic score that a lot of people see on Twitter. All the rest of the offensive linemen are 8.5, 9. We have 2 10s on the team, like elite level athletes. And Darrell Williams is like a 3.2. Well, Roger Saffold was an 8.9, an elite athlete. And you see pictures of him. The dude's like carved out of rock. He's has no belly whatsoever. And is at 6'5", 325 is a ridiculous athlete. So obviously that points towards the athleticism that Aaron Kromer likes in his offensive line, maybe more of a zone scheme, getting out in space and moving. Obviously, we know that makes more sense with, Mitch Morris. That makes more sense with Spencer Brown. So I think it's a smart ad that way. I like Darrell Williams. I think he was fine, but I think Roger Saffold is I'll say a small upgrade. I don't think he's like a huge leap forward. It's not like we added Quentin Nelson or signed Brandon Scherf, but he's a little bit better than Darrell Williams. And I think he's also a little bit better player, and he's quite a bit better fit for what Aaron Kromer wanted. So once that happened, both Aaron Quinn and I were talking that it was super likely that this was leveraging either Roger Saffold or Austin Corbett, the two guys who came from Cromer's system and were both free agents. And when they kind of positioned it, that was easy leverage with Darrell Williams to say, hey, you can either stay with a pay cut or we got options here. And I don't even know how much of a pay cut they offered. Obviously the funny part of the, legal tampering period, I don't think the Bills just all of a sudden called up Roger Saffold for the first time at noon today and struck a deal. Yeah. I have a feeling that they already had that worked out when they released Darrell Williams and were like, well, we already got a deal that we liked with Saffold, so best of luck. And they wish they sent Darrell Williams on his way.
And I would venture to say that maybe, like I said, it's possible they didn't even try to get a pay cut out of Williams. If they knew they were going Saffold, what would be the sense of
especially if they heard back from Saffold's people that the number was in line with what they wanted?
Sure.
They likely just let Williams know, hey, we're going to move on.
Yeah. I'll say this, though. I think it's important. Harrison Phillips, I'm going to talk about him in a few minutes. A lot of nice things being said about him on the way out, and obviously it's very much deserved. But I like Darrell Williams, man. I thought he was a good signing over the course of 2 years. I thought he was good at right tackle in 2020.
He was elite in 2020.
Yeah.
Great season.
Yes, he was very good. I'll never forget the way he shut down TJ Watt 2 years ago. And then this past year, I think he was kind of put in a tough situation, bouncing back and forth between tackle and guard. He just didn't look like quite the same player, but he was playing well at the end of the year when the offensive line finally got a little cohesiveness. I like the move. I just want to make sure that nobody's kicking Darrell Williams on the way out. I agree with you 100% too. I think it's a modest upgrade with just a better fit for the system that they're running, as opposed to, the player maybe just being head and shoulders so much better than the other. All right. Well, defensive, the other big moves today were, or at least again, at this point, 2 defensive tackles they signed. And I'm going to tell you right now, the casual football fan, Greg, and I already know this because I got a lot of friends who follow the Bills, but they know the superstar players. They don't know the depth players, the role players, the decent players, as well as a lot of people talk about them, especially somebody like yourself. But Tim Settle from Washington, they got a 2-year deal, and Daquan Jones, I'm not sure. I didn't know. Was it a 2-year deal too? I'm not even sure.
I looked. I haven't seen that one reported, so I'm guessing that means 1 year.
Right.
But we'll see when the details come out.
Well, tell people a little bit about these two guys, because the first thought, again, Harrison Phillips, it was a very popular player with this team on the field and off the field. And he did, injury issues aside, he played well, especially in the tail end of last year. I think there were at least some people surprised. He ended up going to Minnesota, getting 3 years. I think $19.5 million is the original contract report. But before talking about him, talk about the 2 guys that, in part anyway, are gonna replace him on this line.
So it is a combination move, and my guess is that we probably added these guys for probably the combination of what Harrison Phillips was paid. So it's a lot of it is about not necessarily upgrading or anything from Harrison Phillips. It's going to be similar in the discussion. It's the fit. So, we were asking Harrison Phillips to play one technique and to be a stout 2-gap guy who could hold the point of attack and take on double teams. And he had moments down the stretch where he really started to do that, but I'm not sure that's ever his top fit. I'm not sure that's ever what he's going to be best at in the NFL, but he had a nice season and did well and earned a nice contract. So now you go in, Daquan Jones and Tim Settle are the combination of those 2 things, but are probably a little bit better at each thing than what Harrison Phillips was as one player trying to play both roles. Daquan Jones, you're talking about a huge human who is a stout 1-tech, longtime guy for the Tennessee Titans, just played this last year in Carolina, but played the previous, I think, 8 years in Tennessee. Never misses a game, hasn't missed a single game for 7 years, and only had 1 season where he's ever missed any games in a season. Is your prototypical space-eating guy that you cannot move off the spot. Actually has a little bit of pass rush ability to push the pocket, but ultimately is just your big 2-gap double team eating guy. Tim Settle is kind of sneaky. He is 6'3", 325, which sounds like another 1-tech. He's actually not that good at a 1-tech or run defender, but he's a super good pass rusher. He's actually a really big upgrade from Vernon Butler is what he is. So towards the end of the year, they started sitting Vernon Butler. they weren't even playing the extra guy. They were asking Harrison Phillips to kind of do both things and rotating in defensive ends inside and bringing up guys like Eli Ankow. So they were asking Harrison Phillips and Ed Oliver to play a ton of snaps. There are games towards the end of the year where they're both playing like 70% of snaps. Harrison Phillips not going to be that guy. So, I think Daquan Jones is a better one tech than Harrison Phillips. Tim Settle is probably a better three tech than Harrison Phillips. I don't think either of them are as versatile as Harrison Phillips. Neither of them could do both jobs like Phillips did. But if that's what we're asking the two of them to do, I'd rather have two of them that probably cost the same as him combined than keep asking him to do roles that he's not quite cut out for. I think Ed Oliver will be better off having Daquan Jones next to him and a guy like Tim Settle rotating in to give him a break than what it was last year. So probably a better scheme fit, even if no one's replacing Harrison Phillips in the community, in the locker room, and he's probably a better overall player than either of them. But I think this is probably a pretty good fit.
Is he one of those, when you talk about Daquan Jones, again, some people look at statistics, just the basic primary statistics, and it never really gives you the full story. This is an argument that's been going on forever. Like, Jerry Hughes stinks because he only had 2 sacks last year. You know what I mean? Obviously, I'm being sarcastic here. He doesn't stink. Point being is he only had 2 sacks. You look at someone like Daquan Jones, you're like, well, he can't get to the quarterback. He only had 1 sack. But I did look up on PFF. I saw somebody put a stat on Twitter. He had 23 pressures and a career best 69.4 pass rushing grade from PFF. So he does have at least a little bit of moderate ability to kind of disrupt the pocket a little bit. I've heard a lot of good things about Tim Settle. I feel like, and I could be wrong, Greg, but last year when there were like rumors floating around that Mitch Trubisky might be on the move to Washington and that the Bills were looking to get a player, I could have sworn at some point last year I heard his name mentioned as a possibility, like the Bills were looking for in a trade, which might make more sense now that they signed him today.
2 years in a row, he's been one of my top trade targets. So Tim Settle is the really sneaky signing here. I don't know that we got some hidden gem or some, undiscovered guy, but there's a chance that we have that. You got to remember, he's stuck behind 3 first-round picks in Washington. They had so much invested on their defensive line. He really didn't get a chance to play that much. And every time he played, he was great. But then you go back and they had Jonathan Allen and they had, and Payne and just so much investment in front of him. And they paid a huge contract to Matt Ioannidis. And they had all these guys that every time he played, he was as good or better than some of those guys, but they had a ton invested in them. So he got a pretty small role. There's a chance we stumbled onto something really special here that he could blossom into more than that. And that's exactly what you want in free agency, is pay at the low end for the potential of what a guy can do. So I feel confident he can be for sure a rotational penetrating pass rushing 3 tech, because we've seen him do that. There's a chance we got more than that. There's a chance that we found something special here, and this is going to be his first chance to compete for big time playing snaps. And that, it's a thing where I would guess Daquan Jones starts, because traditionally you're going to start the run stopping 1 tech alongside Ed Oliver. But it wouldn't shock me if Tim Settle's the one that plays the majority of snaps and is the one that ends up making the bigger impact overall, especially, the pass rushing stats are what people pay attention to. I could see him putting up some nice stats alongside Ed Oliver.
One more question about the defensive tackles, and we'll talk about Star Lotulelei. It doesn't make sense from a financial aspect to cut him right now if you were going to. It's like a minimal cap saving for a lot of dead cap space. Now, that would be a different story if they waited after June 1st, but obviously that wouldn't help them if they were trying to make moves right now. How do you see, and again, I know it's very early, Greg, by the time this airs tomorrow, maybe the Bills have done something else at the position for all we know. But as we're talking right now, late on a Monday night 1 of tampering, I don't even want to say free agency yet, where do you think Star Lotulelei's future is with this team?
So I am planning as though he's not going to be on the team. If he decides he wants to come back and run it back again, honestly, financially, that's probably their best case scenario, is that they get a backup 1 tech behind Daquan Jones and that he contributes here or there as maybe a healthy scratch when they don't need him. But if you're playing Tennessee, if you're playing New England and you want 2 1 techs, he's good. And we're paying him regardless of whether he's on the team or not. So there's a chance if he wants to retire. I explained on our show, there's a path where, he's not going to want, he's under contract. So if he wants to retire, he doesn't get that guaranteed money unless he shows up for mini camp, unless he shows up for training camp, and then they cut him at the end of training camp to retire. So there's a chance they negotiate that and say, hey, if you give back the 2.5 million in guarantees, we won't fine you, and the fines would actually be more than 2.5 million, and you don't have to come and pretend to want to go through training camp. So that's one option. Or you're right, and Sal Capaccio confirmed this earlier. If people get all excited about the post June 1st designations, you can do that. But when you designate someone post June 1st, you split the dead cap between this year and next year. So it would take Star from like a 1.5 million in savings to almost 4.5 million in savings. But it's because you're kicking 3 million of it into next year, but you don't get that money until June 1st. That doesn't really help except for one thing. There's one spot where that could help, and that's if you've already negotiated and discussed an agreement in principle with someone already on the roster, like say Stephon Diggs, and you want to just wait and announce it after June 1st, which is still before training camp and still around the time that they did the Josh Allen extension last year, then all of a sudden the extra 4.5 million might help to be able to do that. So, or Dawson Knox or Jordan Poyer or one of those kind of things where it's already a player under contract. You don't need to do the extension earlier, and you could wait until then to do it. That's the one scenario where doing a post June 1st designation for his release, getting the extra cap space, then you could trade that off to be able to give that player you extend a little extra money right now and then swap that for next year. So that I am going under the impression there, but ultimately financially, it probably helps them the most if he just shows up and plays maybe under a little bit of a pay cut if he wants to pay. But I am going under the impression that last year getting COVID during the season, already having the concerns with his heart, if that happened, I think the man cares a lot about his family and is ready to go.
All right, I'm back with Greg Tompsett from Cover One. All right, so far, again, late in the Monday night, the Bills have made 3 moves. They haven't really activated any potential big money emergency, so to speak, options if they're there, if they wanted to. Like, for an example, if they were to cut Cole Beasley, they could do that. You mentioned Stephon Diggs. There's other guys, Deion Dawkins, maybe there's a couple others that they could restructure. They did restructure Mitch Morse. I want to talk about him in a minute. They saved a couple million by doing that. But point being is that they still have moves they could make if they decide if there's a player worth, pushing that money over for or making the move for the money. Is this kind of like online for a day one of what you expected? Maybe not necessarily the specific players, but just the Brandon Beane approach going into this tampering period, as opposed to say like Jacksonville or the Chargers, which I want to talk about them as well in a minute.
Yeah, we'll get to them in a second. I would say if you told me they were going to extend a player, re-sign a player, and add 3 new players all on the first day, that's probably a little more than I expected. I probably would have told people like, hey, I don't expect that much early on. I expect we're probably going to be a little slower than what fans want to hear. But the fact that we've heard, I mean, they're in on some major players. Like, we've heard reports that they're still very much in on a Chandler Jones, that they checked in with JC Jackson.
How much do you buy it?
Pushing. Well, so one, I think fans underestimate how much homework and how many players they check in with, period. Like, you don't know if somebody's going to be a good value unless you check in. So I think they check in, I'm not exaggerating, with hundreds of players. Like, I think they check in with a ton of representatives to gauge interest, especially at positions they're interested in. So I think it's super easy to throw those things out there because, of course, they're checking in. It's their job to do their due diligence on those situations. I do think there's some genuine interest with, say, a Chandler Jones more than just all the top list of everything. Matter of fact, you heard Emmanuel Ogbah talked about the fact that the Bills were talking with him and just Miami ended up topping the offer. So the Bills were in on some high-priced defensive ends. Those are the situations you talked about earlier where the Bills don't have the cap space to do that now, but with Matt Milano, Trey White, Deion Dawkins, even Josh Allen, you can restructure any of those contracts where there's no chance you're going to release any of those guys.
Sure.
And you can create 20 million in cap space immediately. Now you're borrowing that from the future, that you're just kicking that money into the future, but it doesn't really hurt because there's no chance you're going to cut players like that. So I do think there's some there, but I would say it was a little busier than I would have expected today.
A guy like Chandler Jones, or say a trade. I know you've talked about Danielle Hunter plenty. If you're watching that video, Greg's emotion when that name was just mentioned.
That dude's by far my number one. It has been for like 2 years now. I hope they mess that up and let him go.
What do you think the Bills' chances are of this moment, as of this moment right now, of bringing back Jerry Hughes as things stand right now? Because they haven't made a move at defensive end yet. And if they were to go out and let's say they were to get a Chandler Jones, and I don't know, you would have a better idea, ballpark of what it would cost than I would. Let's just say a Chandler Jones, or maybe even someone, a lesser player, but a good known defensive end that you're going to pony up for. Does that eliminate bringing back Jerry Hughes? Or do you think maybe if Hughes still wanted to play for $3.5, $4 million for another year, the Bills would be able to swing that too?
So I will say, I don't think the 5-man defensive end rotation was an anomaly, especially if one or two of them are able to kick inside. So it all depends on who the other addition is. If it makes a lot more sense for the fifth guy in my mind to be an F.A. Obata or a Shaq Lawson type, where it's a strong side defensive end on rundowns who can kick in and pass rush inside on pass rushing downs. And it makes sense for them to be active on game day because that can kind of play both roles. So if that's the kind of addition, then of course Jerry would make sense to bring back as the rotational pass rush guy. If it's a bigger name guy that his primary function is pass rush, I kind of think that's instead of Jerry. I don't know that you would add a purely pass rush guy as the fifth guy. I guess depending on, maybe they see Boogie Basham as that guy and they don't, and they end up, say they did get a Chandler Jones and a Jerry Hughes, and they just say, hey, Jerry, we're going to bring you back, but you need to know it's probably on like 35-40% of snaps. We're just going to have you go in third downs, obvious passing downs, go wreak some havoc and stay fresh, but we're going to start Gregory Rousseau and Chandler Jones. Those are going to be our primary guys, and they're going to play the majority of snaps, and then you're going to rotate with Epinesa, and Basham will be the rundown guy with the kick inside on pass rush downs. And with those five, it would make sense with Ed Oliver, Tim Settle, and Daquan Jones. Those 8 defensive linemen would be perfect on game day. That's a scenario I could see, but ultimately, I think it's kind of one of those stretch defensive ends or Jerry. And if they don't hit on those, I think they'd happily welcome Jerry back and say, hey, you were still productive last year. Of course, we'd love you to get home more often, but you were getting pressures, you were making an impact. And ultimately we're depending on these young guys taking a step forward, whether we like it or not.
A guy like, say, does a guy like Shaq Lawson make you think that maybe they are going a little bit of big game fishing? Because, I mean, this dude can't be more obvious that he wants to play in Buffalo. He's putting gifs of himself up in the Buffalo Bills uniform on Twitter, talking about how he's trying to get back to Buffalo, after 2 long years, this and that. But yet the Bills still haven't signed him. And you think maybe that might be because they're trying to land something bigger than Shaq Lawson. No disrespect to Shaq, but.
Well, yes, but I also think it's the reality of, we spent 20 years where we would have been ecstatic for a Shaq Lawson to want to come back. Like, oh my God, a player wants to come back and play here. Oh right. My God, this is amazing. We have options now. We don't need to rush into anything. It's either a guy we targeted or we'll let you know. Because if we say no to him, there's like 6 other guys like that would happily sign a deal in Buffalo to come play. You heard what Roger Saffold said. Roger Saffold took less money to come here because he thinks he can come win a championship. And it's easier. He's already made $70 million in his career. It's a lot easier to make those decisions at that point for a guy like him. But there's players like that where at that level, we're going to add, there's other spots. We're going to add a solid tight end too. We're going to add a cornerback. We're going to add probably 2 defensive ends. We're probably going to add a linebacker. There's multiple spots where we're going to we're probably going to add a wide receiver. There's multiple spots. And like a lot of them are going to be last year's Matt Breida or last year's F.A. Obata, but some of them can be nice hits that you end up finding a guy that ends up being a really nice addition. So we're going to have options. And now people saw what Josh Allen did. People want to hitch their wagon to that.
Let me ask you about who's you mentioned tight end. That's what I was thinking in my mind here. What's going on with this mark? It seems every tight end out there is getting $8 million or more right now.
It's insane. So I'm pretty good. I'm confident in my projections for contracts. I'm good at it. And I have not missed more than I have in the tight end market. Every single guy is coming in like 150% of what I projected. Will Disley at $8 million a year, Evan Ingram with $10 million, $9 million guaranteed. Multiple guys that we were interested in. Heck, the most normal one was Mo Alley Cox, got 3 years for $18 million. The $6 million a year was about more of what I expected. But he's a blocking tight end too that got $18 million. So I don't quite know. I don't know what to. There are some guys that we still targeted that I think make sense. I like Tyler Conklin a lot from Minnesota. Hayden Hurst from Atlanta makes some sense. There's still guys floating out there that I think would be a decent fit. OJ Howard hasn't signed, and I think you can see Gronk go back to Tampa Bay now. I think that Brady's back. That makes too much sense. But ultimately, just like that backup quarterback, we're just waiting out musical chairs. We're just waiting out. Hey, you're right. A bunch of teams are handing out big money, and at some point that's going to stop. And that when that runs out, hey, we got $4 million over here in Buffalo. If you want to catch passes from Josh Allen, come on over. And we're just waiting. It's gonna be the same thing. Quarterbacks are gonna get $8-10 million deals from some of these like scrappy teams that know they're gonna draft Malik Willis and need a placeholder. And then it's gonna be, hey, we got $2.5 million over here if you want to come be Josh Allen's backup. And some of it we just got to be patient and wait out that musical chairs.
I'd be remiss if I didn't have you on the podcast as much as I've talked about him over the last month. And granted, everything changed on Sunday when Tom Brady unretired. But I thought Gronk to Buffalo was a very strong possibility. In fact, I was willing to bet money on it. I was going to give anyone who wanted to bet me, if he didn't retire, I would take Buffalo and you could have the field. That's how confident I was that he was going to end up coming here. Now, obviously, with Tampa, but I will say this. A, why haven't we not heard from Gronk? B, why is he not immediately re-signed with Tampa? Tampa re-signed like 4 or 5 guys today, and they're also not doing well with the cap. So they can't sign everybody. Do you think that there might be a chance that, and I'm sure Tom Brady will have significant input on whether Gronk is offered a contract to stay with Tampa, obviously, but I don't know, Greg. And again, I can look dumb 24 hours from now or 12 hours from now, but I'm not 100% sure that Gronk is going back to Tampa. But let's assume, I want to get your take on that, but also let's say he does go back because that's that's the more likely outcome. You mentioned OJ Howard. How do you think he would be a fit on this team? Because he's a guy that I've always thought had good potential that never quite played up to it. I mean, he's had moments, but I don't think he's ever quite played up to his potential. What do you think about him as a football player?
So obviously he's a guy who was a elite talent coming out, a top 10 pick, and a lot of people, even targeting that Buffalo could have been going after him in that draft to be able to try to get him. Has never really panned out in there. He's had moments, but there was also some iffy quarterback play. And then also they signed Cameron Bray and then brought in Gronk. So there's also some idea of, hey, I wonder if he would have developed more if he gave him more snaps and more opportunity, which I think is perfect for a situation like this. Because one, he's not going to cost a lot. It might cost a little bit more because of the draft premium and some of the potential that goes along with that. But there's no pressure. You're bringing him in to be a tight end 2. We have Dawson Knox. We got Gabe Davis. We got Stephon Diggs. We don't need somebody to come in to save the day. Just come in and play your role. Be a good active blocker and be available in 2 tight end sets. And I think it's a nice opportunity to kind of rebuild some value and present yourself for a future contract or to be able to fit in on a great team. I don't think there's a chance that they unlock some of that original potential, but I think after this many years, we kind of see what he is. So I think he would be a fine signing. I would much prefer Tyler Conklin. I would much prefer some of the other guys that are out there, but that's the kind of name that I would want to be going after. And I think that there's, a handful of things with a guy like him. And you brought up Gronk. I think that it makes sense that, you know, he was assuming he didn't know about Brady's thing until everybody else finding out. He didn't know ahead of time. So he was also talking with all these other teams. He also knows how many other teams want him. He also knows the money other teams were willing to pay him. My guess is Tampa Bay came back and said, well, you're coming back, right? You're just going to come back for really cheap because we can't really afford a lot. And he's probably going, well, of course I want to play with Tom, but these other teams are going to pay me this. Can't you guys pay me this? So that's what I'm guessing that it's there. And I think it's probably still 80% plus that he goes back there and they figure out a way to make it work. But it's not a slam dunk that, you know, he heard how many other teams loved him and wanted to throw money at him. And, you know, Cincinnati just lost their starting tight end. CJ Uzomah went to the Jets. They have an opening there. He talked about liking Burrow. You know, I think that he'd love to come back to Buffalo and play in his hometown with Josh Allen. But I also don't know. I think the Bills were kind of hoping to be in the Buccaneers position of, hey, we have the best situation. We can't offer you the most money, but you have the best chance to win a championship and to look good. Well, if he's going to take a discount, he's probably going to take a discount to be with Brady. But we'll see. We'll see where that goes.
For what it's worth, and who knows if Chad Johnson's messing around or not, because I've seen no reports, and it was over 90 minutes ago. But you mentioned something about Kyle Rudolph going to Cincinnati, but I've seen I've seen no reports. What is your feeling towards like fans? Because Jarvis Landry was a name that was discussed early on Monday. There were reports that the Bills and the Chiefs were going to be in on him after he got released from Cleveland. And then I seen a later report. I can't remember who it was from, to be honest with you, but somebody said that they didn't mention the Bills. It was Kansas City and Green Bay were the two teams that were talked about the most. But you're on Twitter enough. I mean, you're on social media. You see fans and what they got to say about a guy like Jarvis Landry and Gronkowski as well, because, you know, they hit on Trey White, they hit on Aaron Williams, dirty hit. Yeah. It seems like, you know, I think fans care a lot more than the organization itself does. And I'm quite confident if they were going to go give Gronk, for an example, $8-9 million for a year, I'm pretty confident that they've at least mentioned it to Trey White. And I'm sure ditto, maybe, well, Aaron Williams is long gone from the team, but, you know, someone like Jarvis Landry, I don't think that has any effect on their decision making, what some fans might think of past actions. You agree?
100%. And I think that, you know, you saw Aaron Williams wrote an article in the Player Tribune that he harbors no resentment and understands it was a mistake in the moment, and he wasn't like out to get him in the game. Like in that moment, he did a cheap thing, but it wasn't like he went into the game planning to end Aaron Williams' career. It was just a really horrible situation from a really embarrassing, terrible mistake. I don't like Jarvis Landry still from that. He's one of my least favorite players in the league.
Me too.
Like I genuinely don't like him. I don't want the Bills to sign him, but I'd get over it. Like I'd if he helps the team win, I'd root for him to help the team win, even if I don't like him.
I agree.
I would have felt, I don't know why, but I never had the visceral reaction other people did to the Gronk moment. Like it was also kind of stupid, but it was just a dumb reaction in the moment. And it was cheap, and he apologized, and Trey accepted the apology. And I didn't think it was I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should react more strongly than what I did, but I didn't have the same emotional reaction that a lot of people did to that. So I would have got over that too and would have been okay with it. But I get it. I understand why people don't like both of them. And that I get not wanting to root for that. But ultimately, once they make the first clutch third down catch that helps win a game, everybody will cheer and get over it. Nobody's going to care.
That's how it was last year with Cole Beasley. Before the season, everyone hated him. One game and then one drive into the season, 90% of the fans were completely fine with him. I agree with you about Jarvis Landry. I don't like him as a person, and I don't want him on this team. And I don't want him on the team not because I don't like him. I don't like him. I just feel like there's better receivers out there. Now, to be fair, he's been with Baker Mayfield the last couple of years, who can make you look bad too. As well. I don't know. I feel like there's better receivers out there, regardless of what they do. And I think we both agree they're not done at wide receiver, but it is worth noting that Isaiah McKenzie is the guy who re-signed for a 2-year deal. And you look at these numbers, Greg, 2 years, it was like 4.4 million up to 8 million. Only a $600,000 signing bonus. I'm looking at the numbers right now, and only a $1.875 million 2022 cap hit. I got to ask you, Not so much surprised that he's back, but are you surprised that at those numbers that he elected to re-sign with Buffalo without even like testing the market? That's what I'm a little bit surprised about.
So I'll politely, the same way that we joked about Roger Saffold, the idea, and I heard people ask him about this in the press conference. The idea that he didn't test the market is adorable. The idea that people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you re-signed without your agent having any idea what
Right.
any other team would pay. That's amazing. Grow up, everybody.
Yeah, I
Grow up.
know.
2 years in a row, he has re-signed for 1.75 million cap hit and 1.85 million cap hit. Maybe we should just take it as an idea of what the NFL thinks of him.
Yeah. Your partner says it all the time, and he's not wrong. Aaron Quinn, your podcast co-host, he says Bills fans value Isaiah McKenzie probably a lot more than the league does, and
A
quite
significant
possibly,
amount
yeah,
more.
the team.
Now, don't get me wrong. I'm excited about this deal. I'm
Me too.
excited about getting a player back at that cheap of a number who obviously has moments where you can use him to a very solid degree is great. That's a very good thing. I'm not upset about that at all. I haven't, we've seen the touch and go element in the return game of his trustworthiness to be the return guy.
Sure.
We've seen really good performance in man coverage out of the slot and not a lot against zone coverage. Well, guess what? 70% of the NFL runs zone. So the 30% of the time is great to have him, but the other rest of the time he can't get open. That's not worth $8 million. That's not worth crazy deals. But I joked about this. If you ask me which deal I want, 2 years and 4.4 million for Isaiah McKenzie, or 3 years for 30 million for Zay Jones, the Jacksonville gave up, I'll take Isaiah McKenzie. Thank you.
Holy shit. I still can't. I just look, I get you. You're trying to add some talent, but oh my God, 3 years, $30 million for Zay Jones. You're obviously going to agree with this too. Signing McKenzie does literally nothing to prevent the Bills from whatever they're going to do a wide receiver. I mean, you're pretty confident, obviously, whether it's free agency, maybe it's a trade, maybe it's early in the draft, middle part of the draft. The Bills are definitely
first
going to
round
add the receiver, right?
I joked about this. At no point is an NFL general manager going to say, well, Jameson Williams was our highest graded guy in the board at pick 25, but we just re-signed Isaiah McKenzie. So
right.
At no point is that sentence going to come out of any general manager's mouth ever.
Yeah.
He's just not that kind of guy. Like it's not that kind of thing. Heck, I like Daquan Jones and Tim Settle a lot. I don't think that stops them from taking a defensive tackle at pick 25. Like it's just people have these ideas of like, well, that hole is filled now, so that's totally off the board. We're not doing that anymore. It's not how this works.
One more position I wanted to briefly hit on, and then I want to just go over a couple other things before I get you out of here. Cornerback. I mean, who knows when it's coming? Who knows who it's going to be? I know Joe Biscaglia did his mock-off season last week, and he had the Bills signing Joe Hayden to like a 1-year, $2 million prove-it deal, which, again, our boy Aaron Quinn hates Joe Hayden, did not like that move. But
he was so mad at me for proposing him.
But look, the Bills are going to do something at corner, right? I mean, Levi Wallace probably is gone. Again, I don't want to jump to anything definitive. Maybe he's looking at the market right now, and maybe it's not what he thought, and maybe he takes a value deal to stay in Buffalo. I don't know that. You don't know that either right now, at least anyway. But let's assume that they lose him. I mean, you got an injured Trey White, and you got Dane Jackson, you got literally nothing else. They got to add veterans, and obviously, I would say a corner is very much in play in the first round, if not the first, definitely the second. Right. Although we said that shit last year, and they didn't draft any corners. But I mean, corners, like sometimes I think we overthink things, and spend so much time worrying about these other positions. They got to do something at cornerback, right?
100%. Well, I mean, last year they didn't draft it, but they had Levi Wallace and
Dane Jackson.
Yeah. That's much different, and a healthy Trey White.
Yeah.
So that's much different than right now. They have to make some moves here. They probably need to do a signing and a significant draft pick just to balance out having the right amount of people. We don't know for sure that Trey's going to be able to play week 1. It's a 50-50 proposition. He could start the season on the PUP list. The combination of guys that are out there that we can't afford are in that Levi Wallace range. We already saw Sidney Jones sign. That was a guy that both me and Eric and Aaron liked. Akello Witherspoon was a guy that I liked. He re-signed in Pittsburgh. Joe Hayden is a guy that I'm fine with as a Band-Aid if we're going like corner in the first round and you just want a veteran just in case the guy's not ready, day one. There's still guys out there that I like. Dante Jackson's still available. Rasul Douglas is still available. There are guys that I think we can add that are in that Levi Wallace tier, either slight upgrades or slight downgrades, but in that same range. But also Levi Wallace coming back is another option as well. I expect us to add a $6 million-ish cornerback and a top 3 round draft pick.
If this goes another 24 hours, I wouldn't be shocked if Levi Wallace does end up coming back. I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't be doing cartwheels, but they could do worse. We've talked about this before. I talked about this with Aaron a lot. He's a great floor player. Like if that's as bad as it is for you, then you could do a lot worse than him. So the Bills made other moves, and we're not going to spend any more time talking about that. I mean, just Mitch Morse signed the extension. We talked about Harrison Phillips already. The Bills cut Williams. They cut AJ Klein. They cut John Feliciano, who's already signed with the New York Giants, which is no surprise. He's going to be playing center. Maybe that's a little bit of a surprise. The one guy I did want to ask you about, though, Mitch Trubisky ends up going to Pittsburgh. 2 years. Looking at the contract, so it's 2 years, $14.25 million, worth up to $27 million. That's from Tom Pelissero. Your thoughts on him going to Pittsburgh? And I don't know. I mean, there were a lot of other teams being rumored. This feels to me, given the contract and the team he's going to, I don't think he's 100% going to be the starter, but I think he goes into camp very likely to start, or maybe they draft somebody and, kind of bring him along. But it feels like he's going to be the starter for Pittsburgh in 2022. I mean, he signed on day one of free agency. I think he's probably got a good inkling of that, right?
I have to imagine he did not sign anywhere that he didn't get a very strong indication that not a guarantee, not that there was no competition, but a really strong indication that, hey, you have a very clear path to being our starting quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Now they don't know what's going to happen in the draft. They're picking at pick 20. That's a crapshoot. You have no idea who's going to be there. Obviously you have like a Kenny Pickett who's from Pitt and literally like in the city with the team. But I don't know that any guy in this draft is ready to start day one. I don't think any of them are.
Right.
So when you see a contract like that, he is 100% betting on himself. When you had as little playing time as you had last year, every incentive for Mitch Trubisky is a not likely to be earned incentive because he didn't accomplish much last year. And for anybody who doesn't know, I won't get too nerdy into the cap stuff, but when you see likely to be earned and not likely to be earned, the difference is, did they do that last year? So, you could literally put it at 300 yards passing on the season and it would be not likely to be earned. When it's not likely to be earned, those incentives don't count against the cap. The only time they count is if you achieve it at the end of the season, they will count against next year's cap. So that up to $27 million might actually be really easy to achieve numbers to get him to $13.5 million or whatever it is, and just by being the starting quarterback, 80% of the snaps, and then they won't pay for it until next year. So he's clearly banking on being the starting quarterback if he agreed to almost double the contract in incentives, but they can't guarantee what will happen in the draft. I would assume he's given a pretty strong indication that you're going to be our guy.
Okay. I want to go around the league now quickly here too. We won't talk about stuff that's already went down, but last week was just absolutely insane. I mean, Aaron Rodgers stays, Russ Wilson gets traded, Carson Wentz gets traded, Khalil Mack goes to the Chargers, more on them in a second, Mari Cooper to Cleveland, and then, of course, Tom Brady unretires. This is all just last week, and now it's Monday, and we've already had a big flurry of signings. Let's start with Jacksonville, man. Holy shit. I mean, look, and in some ways, I kind of want to give them credit too, though. But all right, so here's who they signed. They signed a guard, Brandon Scherf, a really good guard. They gave a lot of money to Christian Kirk. They gave a lot of money to Zay Jones. And then they signed Evan Ingram, a guy who many people thought was going to be a good fit potentially for the Buffalo Bills. So you got 2 receivers, a tight end, a good guard, and they got a few pieces on defense as well. My first thought is, Jesus Christ, right? They're throwing out all this money like crazy. They're signing everybody. Somebody on Twitter, I can't take credit for something that I didn't think of originally, but they kind of liken it to the Bills in 2019. Josh Allen's rookie year, 2018. They needed more talent, and they went out and they signed John Brown, they signed Cole Beasley, and they made some moves on the offensive line. It's kind of in a way what Jacksonville's doing right now. I mean, you got Trevor Lawrence. He had kind of garbage around him for talent, garbage coaching too, of course. But they went out and they're aggressive. I mean, they're at least trying, if nothing else. I'm not confident. Like if it was my team, I wouldn't be confident spending all this money, but they got the cap room and, they're aggressive. Like, what are your thoughts on them right now?
Yeah, well, one, when your team's terrible, you don't have that many good players to pay, so you have a ton of cap space. So it's not like they're pulling money out of future years or mortgaging the future. This is just how much money they have to work with. And they had very little talent on that team. So DJ Chark was a free agent. They still have Marvin Jones, which is at least a professional wide receiver, but that was it. They had nothing else there. So signing multiple receivers was always the case here. The same thing they have. Guy like Dan Arnold is a tight end that some people like, but they didn't really have much there. They have a center and a couple tackles. So Brandon Linder is a solid center. Cam Robinson, they franchise tagged at tackle. And then at the other one, they have two high draft picks in Juwan Taylor and Walker Little kind of competing there. So adding a stud Brandon Scherf next to a young tackle makes a ton of sense to be able to do that. So, I'm going to liken this to probably more similar to how I described the Patriots offseason last year. So you have to separate the two things. Did they grossly overpay? Yes. But did they also add a ton of talent to the team? Also, yes. So during this year, during this season, from now until the Super Bowl, do those overpays matter? No, they don't matter at all. None of that matters.
Right.
Now, a year from today, they might be releasing half these players. They might be releasing 5 other players to make room for them. But from right now till the Super Bowl, it doesn't matter at all. The overpay doesn't matter. All you did was add 5 really talented players onto your team, and 4 players and Zay Jones onto your team. So going through and being able to be in that spot, you added talent around Trevor Lawrence. So yes, the same way that right now New England is regretting spending all that money last year and overpaying a bunch of guys, but their team got better. They added talent. They got better around Mac Jones. These guys are doing the same thing around Trevor Lawrence. They got better. They'll regret it a year from now, but they're getting way better.
Quick note, unrelated, because again, we're following Twitter as we're taping this. Harrison Phillips contracts details came in year one. I just read he's going to be getting $8.5 million in year one and $13 million total guaranteed. So just for people out there wondering, like, what was the price that Brandon Beane was not willing to pay? Well, there you go. The other team I wanted
and I'll say, I mentioned it earlier, I will virtually guarantee that the year one number for Tim Settle plus Daquan Jones is less than $8 million, and the guarantees are less than $12 million.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you. All right, now look, I'm a knee-jerk reactor. I'm an overreactor. I'm guilty of this, and I don't try to lie, or I don't try to pretend I'm something that I'm not. I'm telling you right now, and I don't want to call this a hot take, but the Chiefs, obviously, and now Denver with Russ Wilson. I'm telling you, man, the Chargers on paper, dude, this team is going to be really good. I mean, they have a dangerous offense as it was. Now, before you even talk about anybody they added, their offense was plenty good last year. Justin Herbert in year 2. I think he's a different type of quarterback, so I'm not going to ever compare him to Josh Allen. But my point is, from year 2 to year 3, he certainly has the potential to go from being good or great sometimes to being consistently great. I think that's what Josh Allen did, just in a different way, from being occasionally great to consistently great. Now, the problem was the defense. The defense was shit. It was trash. We saw the Raiders last year when they couldn't beat the Raiders to get into the playoffs. It's because their defense couldn't make a stop to save their lives. All right? But they traded for Khalil Mack. They went out and they got J.C. Jackson, who's a very good corner, unless he's not playing against Stephon Diggs. He's a good corner. Then they got Sebastian Joseph Day from the Rams, too, who's a pretty good defensive lineman. And then you got Joey Bosa, Derwin James. There's plenty of talent on this defense. We already know that division is going to be loaded, but I still think everyone kind of is anointing the Chiefs, the Broncos to a lesser extent now. Russ Wilson. Don't sleep on the Chargers, man. I would say, like when Rex Ryan used to say the Bills won the offseason, well, Chargers to me are winning the offseason. This is a team that I thought was already kind of scary, and now they got a lot more talent on the other side of the ball too.
So one, I'll say I agree. The one caveat I'll say is for 3 years in a row now, every offseason, man, have you seen the Chargers on paper? Do you see how talented they
Yeah,
look?
true.
Oh, man, do you see how good they look? How many times they make the
True.
playoffs the last 3 years?
True. Zero.
None. So for everybody who said, man, did you see these guys? They lap the Bills. Kiss my ass. They're catching up to the Bills, and they're still not caught up, but they got better. God bless them. I hope it goes well for them. The moment that the Chargers find a way to stay healthy and put together a full season, I'll be impressed because it'll be the first time. They've never done it.
Right.
So, and the same thing, Justin Herbert, you're absolutely spot on, has a ton of the young Josh Allen in him in the same way that nobody watches Chargers games. You could lie and say that you do. Everybody watches Chargers highlights. Nobody watches whole Chargers games. Because if you do, you'll see 6 insanely boneheaded throws from Justin Herbert every week that make no sense. What are you doing? Why are you throwing the ball even remotely close to where you are? And then 15 phenomenal throws that are amazing. Well, nobody pays attention to the 6 boneheaded throws that, guess what? That's why they lost so many games and why they didn't make the playoffs. So on paper, you're spot on. It is a ridiculous collection of talent. They haven't shown the ability to build a cohesive team to play together. They haven't shown the ability to stay healthy, and Justin Herbert hasn't shown the ability to play a complete game. If they do those things, they're one of the most talented teams in the league. I think they can absolutely give the Chiefs a run for their money. I'm really glad that division keeps adding stuff together because now it's going to be easier for the Bills to get home field advantage.
Last question, and then I'll let you go. And I love you, man. I appreciate your time. Let's do this. So you've done many podcasts with Aaron, or you've done shows with Eric, Pro-Ant, all you guys, and you spent a lot of time preparing for free agency. Thank God, because it's been very entertaining and informative content for the last several weeks. Now we are 24 hours into the legal tampering period. Let's just call it free agency because that's what it is. Now that this is night one's, for the most part, over, unless something crazy happens, like at the midnight hour tonight, literally at the midnight hour here, unless something nuts happens, this is pretty much what it's going to be for night one. Going forward now over the next maybe handful of days up to a week, just paint a little bit of a picture what you think the Bills are going to do left and what's left and what you think they're going to do in your opinion. Like, and it could be something realistic. It could be, maybe you're shooting for the stars a little bit, maybe kind of combine one or two things you'd like to see, or, one or two things that you think are going to happen besides the obvious, again, with quarterback too. I mean, they're obviously going to get somebody, but yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple like that where they're not going to lean on the draft. There's a couple spots where I don't know. They might lean on the draft and we're just nervous until the draft comes of who the guy will be. Quarterback 2 is one of those. They're not going to do that. They're going to sign a quarterback 2. I can give you a list of Andy Dalton and Ryan Fitzpatrick and Marcus Mariota and Tyrod Taylor. I don't know which one it's going to be. It's probably going to be one of those 4 guys. It's probably going to be one of those. Whichever one doesn't get the biggest contract and loses the musical chairs, he'll be there. I do think they add a little something at running back, whether that's a JD McKissick or someone like that. I think a receiving back, maybe a James White even isn't crazy. Something like that. I could see them doing something along those lines. I do think wide receiver is one where I expect it to be more in the draft. I won't be shocked if we don't see any additions at wide receiver or maybe a low level guy. I think that's more of the draft. I kind of think we see a tight end too. Durham Smythe is the kind of guy, probably not an exciting, sexy name, but maybe someone like that who's a good blocker and can be able to go. If there's a splash, I think it'll be at pass rusher. And it might not be. I think it's 50-50 at best. If there's a splash, I think it's a pass rusher. I would love for it to be a trade for Danielle Hunter, but most likely our top end would be a splurge for Chandler Jones, where they figure out kind of like a Roger Saffold deal, where it's a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal, but it's multiple void years to be able to drop the number down. And he gets the 12 or 13 or $14 million he needs, but it doesn't crush the cap and they're able to fit it in. I think that's the biggest splurge we could expect. And then, like I said, I expect like a $6 million-ish corner. That could be Levi Wallace. It could be Rasul Douglas. It could be Dante Jackson. It could be Casey Hayward. Someone in that ballpark is the kind of guy that I would expect for them to add. So I think we're going to see more names to come. But if there's one splash, I think it'll be a pass rusher.
You know what? The fun part about talking about this team now, as opposed to say if we were doing this 5, 10 years ago, if we were podcasting and doing these videos, is that players will want to come here if they're chasing a ring, and if they're not getting that big money and they're trying to settle on teams, the success of the Bills and stuff like that is going to matter now more than it ever did. So some names you might have thrown out that maybe 5 years ago would be like, well, the Bills paying the most money, because if they're not, then forget about them. You know what I mean? That's not the case anymore. So that's the part I love so much right now about being a fan of the Buffalo Bills and just talking about this team. All right, everybody. Look, do I got to plug your shit, man? Everybody already knows it. Anyway. Greg Tompsett, Aaron Quinn, Cover One podcast, part of the Cover One network, man. I say this all the time. You guys have my favorite show. I have Aaron on an awful lot because we shoot the shit about 90s R&B. You're too busy. You got too much shit going on. So I save you for the most important shows, which a night like tonight to me was important. So thanks so much, buddy.
It means a lot.